Good afternoon, friends. It is just about 1 o'clock and we're just about ready to begin. So let me explain something about the format and how you can participate in this meet and greet session. My name is Mark Gatza. I am the rector at Emmanuel Church in Bel Air in Harford County, and along with Alma Bell, co-chair of this transition committee. This is our fourth meet and greet session. We've had one at the Claggett Center, one at Emmanuel Cumberland, one at St. James Lothian. The formats have been a little different at each one. At this particular event, we're primarily going to count on questions from you. So if you've picked up a card and written a question, we will have some wranglers sort of wandering through to pick up the questions and deliver them to Alma and me. And we'll be reading those questions during the second half of this event. For the first half, we're going to bring out each candidate individually. They will introduce themselves. They will answer 3 questions. We are one door away from fixing that. We're fixing the door so that the noise goes down. So each candidate will come out, introduce themselves to you. We have 3 questions for them initially. Then we will send them back and bring out another candidate. So you'll get to see each of them individually. We'll take a break. We'll come back and they'll be seated at this on these chairs behind me. And then we will have a chance to ask your questions, which you will sort of fill out and send around to us. Jason Pauling is the chief wrangler, so he'll make sure to get those to us. We have covered a lot of ground on the video material that's available. So questions about human sexuality and the issues around ordination and traditional versus progressive values has already been covered on the videos. Questions about trust and integrity have been covered in the videos. So any questions that represent those areas, we're not going to talk about today because you can see them already on the website. I want to let you know that something like 500 people have already been viewing the sessions that we have had so far. So we are doing some really interesting and good work in this process on behalf of the whole church. Post-COVID, this is a really unique experience. Let me see, what else do I need to say to you all? After the 4 individual candidates, we will take about a 10 or 15 minute break before coming back, so be ready for that. I want to thank the committee that we have been working with. This has been the most amazing. I've been in this diocese 41 years. This is the most amazing committee I have ever worked with. And I just really want to thank Alma, and I have been great partners in this, but all the rest of the folks, if you're on the committee, please stand and wave. Some of them are hiding in other places with their shepherds. We also want to give due credit to the search committee that did such an outstanding job in finding these 4 people for us. So with that, let me turn it over to the rector of Church of the Redeemer, David Ware.
Thank you, and welcome to the Church of the Redeemer. I'm David Ware, a member of the clergy staff here, and on behalf of the vestry and the people and the staff of the Church of the Redeemer, I'm so happy to welcome you here. I'm glad to hear that there'll be a break in a little bit, and that means I've got a little information that probably some of you, about half of you, want to know, and that's where the bathrooms are. So if you go back out the doors that you came and turn to your right and go up the ramp, you'll see them there. We're just so glad to be a part of this process, this important work for the Diocese of Maryland. Thank you for your presence and for joining us here. The Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
Let us pray. Almighty God, giver of every good gift, look graciously upon your church, and so guide the minds of those who shall choose a Bishop Coadjutor for this diocese, and those who offer themselves as candidates. that we may receive a faithful pastor who will care for your people and equip us for our ministries through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. A little louder. There we go.
Hello. Oh, it is on. They did legitimately tell us that we had to be loud in the microphone at first, and then we could calm down. I'm Alyssa Newton, and I am currently serving as the canon for congregational development and leadership formation in the Diocese of Olympia, which is all of Western Washington State. And I also serve St. Columba's Episcopal Church in Kent, Washington, which is about somewhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours south of Seattle, depending on traffic. I'm here with my husband, Andrew. He's over here, who's been supporting me all week, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And we have at home our 2 daughters, Jubilee, who is 13 years old, and Salome, who is 11 years old, and according to the several text messages I've received today, very ready for us to come home. My story with you began several years ago when priests from the Diocese of Maryland came to me as the director of the College for Congregational Development in Olympia, asking if there was any way they could bring that resource to this diocese. I was really impressed with the grassroots nature of this request and just how efficiently they were able to assist in us making that happen. So I got to be the person who directed the first 2 years of your College for Congregational Development. And by the time I left Claggett at the end of the week last June, I knew that I felt deeply called to you. The actual phrase in my mind as I left was, I don't think I'm ready to stop loving these people. I want to do it more and longer. I am fascinated with your diocese and with your state, with all of the differences in climate and geography and culture that are available here in Maryland, and the many discernible strengths of your diocese that really mirror those other strengths in a lot of ways. You follow Jesus as Episcopalians in many different ways and many different contexts here, and I am here for all of them. I am so interested and curious about you. What I bring you, what I offer to you, is the unique experience that I've had for the past 9 years of loving one congregation, St. Columba's, through a dramatic and successful redevelopment process, while at the same time loving 100 congregations in the Diocese of Olympia as their canon for congregational development, and learning what it is like to be a strategy and vision leader in a diocese that has been in a 15-year revitalization process. Also, from before I was ordained, I have, so in total, 15 years of experience teaching, training, and consulting with literally hundreds of congregations across our church, all of whom have come to me or to the teams that I have been on or the trainings that I have been a part of with a deep desire to become more faithful, more healthy, and more effective local expressions of the body of Christ. I I am passionately in love with the local congregation. I believe with my whole heart that the local congregation is the primary place where God transforms Christian people, turning our faces more and more toward Jesus for the sake of the world. That the purpose of the congregation is to gather together the people God has already called to be among us, to transform them, and then to send us out to be salt, light, and leaven in the world. As your bishop, equipping congregations for this work will be my number one priority. I also bring to you an immense curiosity about who you are and how you are. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. It's not the same as Maryland. And I am immensely curious about all of those differences. I want you to tell me what they are. I want you to let me know what I don't know about you. And when you tell me who you are, I'll believe you. The next 2 decades of church are going to be very critical. And I think that you here in Maryland have everything that is needed to not just scrape by, not just merely survive the coming fall of Christendom. I think you have what it takes to absolutely thrive under these conditions. And my hope is that we're going to do that work together.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hold that.
She keeps the microphone. She keeps the microphone.
And now we are going to hear from the Reverend.
No, we ask the questions now.
Okay. We've had different formats that we have been following this week, and so Mark is keeping me on track with where I am today. My first question then to Alyssa is, briefly describe a congregational development success story that you saw or were involved with.
My congregation, St. Columba's Episcopal Church, has been going through a redevelopment process for the past 9 years. I want to tell you a little story from it, which is the story of building our relationship with the South Sudanese congregation that we share space with. When I first got to St. Columba's, there was a lot of tension between the two communities. It had to do with the Sunday morning congregation not always feeling like the South Sudanese congregation, which met on Saturdays, cleaned up. And every once in a while, their children would pull the fire alarm. And by every once in a while, I mean no more than once a month. And they weren't sure that they were taking care of the kitchen. And on the side of the South Sudanese community, they really felt like the Sunday morning community was too tough on them, that they had locked them out of the kitchen because there was just one small fire. And so I knew in my heart that there was a call for these two communities to be in deeper relationship. And I began to attend the Saturday night community about once or twice a month. And there were a few of the people in the Saturday night community who were Anglican. So the South Sudanese community is multi-denominational. They're there to be Sudanese together and to be Christian together, but not to be a particular denomination together. And so the Anglicans started coming to church with us on Sunday morning as well. And eventually, they began to ask me to be their pastor in more concrete ways, to do baptisms, to do weddings, to do memorials and funerals for them. When a South Sudanese person asks their priest to baptize their child, part of your job is to pick a godparent, right? This is one of the big cultural differences between these two communities I love, is that when South Sudanese folks come to ask me to pastor them, I'm in charge of a lot. I pick the godparents, I pick the day, I pick the readings. When my white parents come to me to get their child baptized, I'm in charge of nothing. It is my job to just please pick a Christian person for a godparent, at least just one of them, please. And I try to push them toward a Sunday for the baptism. But as Sudanese families came to me, I realized that they often were separated from grandparents, often were away from family, and so I began to choose older couples in our white community to be the godparents. And they loved it because they also were separated from their grandchildren, often, as adult children can move anywhere. Just ask my mother. So over time, several of the South Sudanese children were growing up with pseudo-grandparents who were their godparents. And in a few years later, our white parents started looking for South Sudanese godparents for their children. And in this way, the sacrament of baptism and the ways in which I was able to flex and encourage, we've developed a community where at St. Columba's, no one has to hold their own baby. Babies are, even now, we're kind of returning to the practice, passed around and often carried to communion by their godparents instead of their parents. And yes, we've grown. There's more people, there's more children, there's more money, all of those things than there was before, but the development is in those relationships between those communities of people.
The average lifespan of a prayer book in the American tradition is about 50 years, which means that ours is about ready for review and revision. That will be something that is managed by the General Convention, including the House of Bishops. What do you foresee the next prayer book or prayer website or prayer disc or prayer thumb drive to be?
I love our current prayer book so very much. I became Episcopalian I became Episcopalian by being confirmed, but I feel like it really was knit into my bones at St. Paul's, Seattle, which is an Anglo-Catholic congregation, by joining an evening prayer team. And every Wednesday night, meeting with 5 other people in a tiny chapel to pray evening prayer together. That's where I was taught to genuflect correctly. And how long to pause at the asterisks when reading a psalm. And I took that with me later in life after we were married and had kids. Andrew worked the night shift a lot. He's a respiratory therapist. And in the early days of babies, he was gone overnight at least 3 times a week. And so the girls and I would pray evening prayer together. And especially the prayer that begins, "Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night," which my children call the daddy prayer, because it was the prayer we prayed for daddy, because he was working that night. So it hurts my heart a little bit to think about that ever going away. I hope it does not. I hope we continue to use this prayer book. It's got such good bones, right? And we're a bigger church than what that prayer book can currently hold. So my hope is, and I don't anticipate anyone putting me in charge of this, but my hope is that we can have expanded resources, that we can have resources so that the non-binary child of my parishioners can attend a worship service where they hear their pronouns used. My hope is that we had this, my congregation, I'm a priest and I have an associate vicar, and we had a guest come and preach who's a man, and it was shocking to the children of our congregation who did not realize that men could also be priests. I want there to be room for everyone to find themselves and a way to pray that recognizes their innate dignity and however God has made them. And I just think we might need more than one book. The book is the center. The book is the bones. But I have a tree in my mind, right? The roots and the trunk. But there's so many leaves and so many branches that we could explore. And we're big enough, we're strong enough to do that.
And now, Alyssa, if you would describe some significant issue that you have changed your mind about in the last 10 years. That should be easy, right?
Totally. I will describe a significant issue that I have changed my mind about in the last 10 years. This is something my congregation taught me. So I was ordained out of St. Paul's, Seattle, where we read the Psalms as they are written in the Psalm book. And we pray the prayers as they are prayed in the Psalm book, and I loved them. And I came to my church, and a couple of years in, a couple started attending whose daughter is transgender. And they experienced the masculine language in the prayers as off-putting. And they looked for their daughters for an image that was less gendered of God. And I will be honest with you, I resisted. I said, we have to keep this so that we remember so that we're discomforted. But what I really meant was, I'm very comfortable with how we are reading them right now. But they didn't leave, and they didn't give up. And so we did end up seeking permission from my bishop to use the St. Helena Psalter. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a Psalter that is in particular looking not to necessarily use feminine pronouns instead of masculine pronouns, but to look at how we might ethically and authentically take away the need we have to gender God. And so we've been praying these Psalms at St. Columba's for at least 6 or 7 years now. And I'm caught short when I run into a bunch of masculine language around God these days. I don't expect every person to feel the way I feel. I didn't want to feel this way myself not so long ago. But it has opened my heart quite a bit, I think, and expanded who I imagine when I image God in my mind, and who I see God reflected in when I look out onto a group of people like this.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.
I don't want to be coming through on 2 mics. So you're... And now we will hear from the Reverend Greg Morris, who comes to us from the Diocese of Chicago.
All right, I got peeps here. I've been instructed to stand up here might be a better idea so that y'all can see me. I am Greg Morris. I am currently in the Diocese of Chicago at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Downers Grove, which is 20 miles west of Chicago in the wild western suburbs. And so I might go up a little bit higher because I'm going to just take a nosedive right off that. And I bring you greetings from my brothers and sisters in Chicago. Before that, I served right here in this diocese at St. John's in Ellicott City, Maryland as an associate. And this is the diocese that birthed my ordained ministry. I did my ordination process through the Diocese of Maryland as a refugee from Pittsburgh in the 2000s. Some of you remember all of that. And so I feel that you welcomed me in then, and I'm very grateful. One of the most important things that you need to know about me is that for the last 22 and a half years, I have been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. 22 and a half years. Thank you. And that is by the grace of God, and as they say, one day at a time. And I tell you that because the spirituality bound up in the 12 steps, which are ancient Christian disciplines, are the heart and soul of my spiritual practice. They keep me grounded, they keep me centered, they keep me keeping first things first, both with God and in my relationships to other human beings. And so, given our history here in the Diocese of Maryland, for which I was present, I had some feelings when I walked into this room today, because the last time I was in this room was for Heather Cook's consecration. So it's real. It's real for me. One of the things they say in AA is that we are only as sick as our secrets. And one of the things that draws me to the Diocese of Maryland is that you all have had the courage and the grace and the help of God to examine your secrets, not only around alcohol, but to examine your secrets around racism, around our legacy of slavery in this diocese. And you have practiced the principles of Christianity and actually the program of AA in saying, and how can we make amends for that? And that's what your reparations are all about. I'm inspired by you that you have that courage, and I want to be part of that work with you. You are leaders in the national church in this regard, and I would be privileged to walk among you and to lead you into the next chapter of what all of this looks like. I'd like to introduce my wife, Laura. Where is Laura? She's over here. Laura. Laura's here. We have two daughters, 18 and 24, so we're sort of recently, mostly empty nesters and exploring that for the first time in our life. And it's great to marry somebody you really like when you're an empty nester, and I have done that. She's a wonder, and I hope you get a chance to talk to her and get to know her. So thank you for this privilege. I come with lots of experience in congregational development and leader development. Clergy mentorship is near and dear to my heart, and I'm very engaged in that in my own diocese and also across the country with the College for Congregational Development. I believe that those are some gifts and skills God has given me that I want to deploy in a larger setting, and we'll probably talk more about that in the questions, so I'll be quiet for now.
Thank you, Greg. We are going to ask you to address briefly a congregational development success story that you saw or helped with.
Thank you. So St. Andrew's Church, where I serve, is a mid-sized to large-sized, transition-sized parish, and I'm the only priest. So that's a tricky place to be. We had this very compressed Sunday morning schedule of 2 services with an hour in between, in which everything tried to happen in that hour. Sunday school, choir, coffee hour, adult forum, and everything, and basically no one was happy. So I had this brilliant idea of moving one of the services a half an hour out to give it more time. And on the wisdom of the vestry, because we made this decision together as a collaborative process, they said, you might as well make both services mad and move both of them 15 minutes instead of just all dumping it on one. I thought, that's wisdom, right? Irritate everybody equally. And so we did that, and it gave so much more time for adult formation. And our children, one of my values was children they are blessed by being in worship the entire service because they learn what it means to worship together. All these good things. So we did this, and we gathered data. We sent out surveys. We talked to people. We had statistical data that said this is a good idea, and so we did it. Adult forum thrived, doubled the numbers because we had time. The choir, super happy, except for now we're complaining that they had to be at church too long on Sunday morning with nothing to do. Mind you, adult forum was right over there, but never mind. So, and we absolutely killed the Sunday school. It went to 0. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, well, that's not good. And we did some in-depth conversations and research with the families of children to say one question: how's the Sunday morning schedule working for you? And what they told us was, you're asking us to be at church too long on Sunday morning. Now, as a priest, I could get into all kinds of arguments about why that's not the right response, and I didn't. I simply said, we hear you. We went back to an hour. We readjusted Sunday school so that the kids come in at the piece, and within 9 months, we went from 0 kids in Sunday school to 25 kids in Sunday school. So congregational development is not a straight line. You don't always get things right the first time, but you got to have the courage to ask the right questions of the right people in order to get to where you need to be.
The average lifespan of a prayer book in our tradition is about 50 years, which means that our Book of Common Prayer is due for review and revision. What do you think the next prayer book should look like?
That's a great question. I deeply value the fact that we have a worship resource, the Book of Common Prayer, that unites us, centers us, grounds us as people in our practice of prayer and worship. I
Speak loud.
Hello. Okay. I will continue. Please, can I have a few extra seconds, Mark?
I turned the watch off.
Thank you. Phew. Flexibility and agility are two key characteristics of a bishop and of clergy and of lay people in the church. So here we go. And as are distractions and disruptions, right? So back on track. I think the 79 prayer book is a beautiful, beautiful worship resource. I also, as I'm utilizing it on a regular basis, which we do in my church, aware of its datedness and its limitations. I long for a prayer book resource that has a more inclusive and expansive language, and at the same time retains the beauty of poetry that we as Anglican descendants, as the Episcopal Church, value and treasure. Don't want to lose that. I don't believe in making things so contemporary that they don't sing. And so I think we can do that. I also wonder that there are so many beautiful resources from other parts of the Anglican communion that we could possibly draw upon and utilize. And I have done this, confession. During the summer, I use a liturgy from the Australian prayer book. I use one from the Canadian prayer book. I use one from the Scottish prayer book. And I always write my bishop, and I send that person a copy and say, this is what I would like to use. Can I have your permission? I've always gotten a yes. But wouldn't it be wonderful if those things you didn't have to just go find as an individual clergy member or someone who designs liturgy, but were more centrally available in some sort of resource? And I kind of wonder in our digital age if a printed book that really is obsolete the minute it comes off the press is the way we need to think about prayer book. I don't have the answer to that question, but I'm willing to think about that question. Do we actually look at a collection of common resources that's not bound and static in one place, that we all have permission, if you will, or authority to draw upon and use, that get at richness of culture, that get at richness of language, that honor creation? There's some beautiful liturgies out there that honor the earth. So those are just a few thoughts that I might have about what's coming around the corner and things I would like to see. Thank you.
And now, if you could describe some significant issue that you have changed your mind about in the last 10 years.
Some significant issue that I've changed my mind about. Okay. Sometimes it takes me a minute to get a hold of the question and to get a hold of something that might have some substance. I grew up in an era and in an area of the country where everything was fairly clearly divided between men and women. And I also was brought up in a religious tradition where that also meant what roles you could hold in church and who had authority and who didn't and all of that stuff. That is why I'm not part of that tradition anymore and why I feel firmly planted and at home in the Episcopal Church. And so that's been an evolution for me. And then I met and fell in love with a gay man. Let me explain that because my wife is present. My dearest friend, my brother, my soul brother, was, and I say was because he is now in heaven, departed this life, and I learned to shed some of the prejudice I had been raised with around gay men by being in relationship and loving a person who was both gay and devoutly Christian. And that changed my theology. The relationship changed my theology, right? And so that journey for me of learning and changing my mind, so it's not like I had this stance and now I have this stance on this particular issue, but I have a dear family member whom I love, who is lesbian, and I now have an in-house resource as the LGBTQIA plus thing seems to keep adding letters that I don't understand because of my generation and because of where I've come from. And so I can go to this person who loves me and who I love dearly and say, okay, can you really talk to me about what it means to be bisexual? Can you really talk to me about what is queer as a term as opposed to all these other things? Like, can you help me here? And because she loves me, she can talk to me about it. And then it's like, okay, well, now that makes sense. And because my heart is open and expansive and inclusive, and yet I don't have the language or the cognitive framework sometimes to understand it. So in those issues, I've let my heart lead me. Because I think that is following the way of Jesus, who opened his arms to all people and welcomed them into his fellowship. It also is terribly Episcopalian because in our baptismal covenant, we promise to respect the dignity of every human being. So in 3 minutes, that's about as good as I can do, but that's an answer to that question.
Thank you. And now we will hear from the Reverend Randy Alexander, who comes to us from the Diocese of Virginia. And he's going to come out and talk to you in a second.
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Alexander. I am blessed to be serving as rector of Emmanuel Church on the Hill in Alexandria, on the campus and across the street from the Virginia Theological Seminary. We are the seminary parish, and we are in all sorts of strategic partnerships with the seminary. I would like to introduce my wife, who is here with us today, the Reverend Patty Faniff Alexander, who is a priest and rector of St. Dunstan's Church in Bethesda in the Diocese of Washington. Key part of who I am and who God is making me to be. Yesterday happened to be the 22nd anniversary of her ordination, and we celebrated it at the meet and greet last night. We cannot have a romantic dinner, but thank you for being with us. Together, we're blessed to have 3 sons, 2 in college and 1 in high school. They're a part of making who I am and who God's calling me to be. Part of who I am is originally a small-town boy from southwestern Virginia, from a town of about 1,000 people, a little town called Rural Retreat. And yet God has put me in all kinds of places since then. So over almost 30 years, I've served across 4 dioceses. First in the Diocese of New York, then here in the Diocese of Maryland with a shout out to Old St. Paul's downtown. Then we were in London. Then I was called back to the Diocese of New York where I was rector of Christ Church Pelham. I was blessed to serve with them for 13 years during 9/11 in suburban New York, during the Great Recession in suburban New York. And then called to my present parish, Emmanuel in Alexandria. In both those places, I have also been called to increasing levels of responsibility on the diocesan level, and I've met Jesus there as well. And it's pulled me out of any sense of parochial isolation that I might feel. But I would direct you to my copious written materials for a little bit more about who I am. In your profile, you say, without a vision, the people perish, from Proverbs. I feel like the Lord has laid it on my heart to share a bit of the vision prayerfully that I would bring. First of all, the last thing I think you need is somebody who shows up thinking they have all the answers. Everywhere I've served over all these years, I showed up with bushy hair, enthusiastic. I show up with a little less hair now. But I would show up and find that God was already there. And then we were called to figure out together what God was calling us to do in the next season. I'm sure that's the case here. God is active and involved with you. The first order of business would be listening sessions, deep listening, relating. I'm thinking of a professor of mine from General Seminary years ago, Margaret Gunther, who wrote a book called Holy Listening. And that has been pivotal to me over all these years. Holy listening. That being said, you have the right to know some of what I would bring to the table in those conversations. I would bring a passionate commitment to discipleship, ever more intentionally seeking to become committed followers of Jesus Christ. As I've prayed about it, I see a deepened web of relationship. A web of relationship that reflects some of the glory and possibility and potential of this diocese. I see mountains in western Maryland. I see southern Maryland. I see shore. I see northeastern Maryland. I see Baltimore and central Maryland. I see a vast number of retired clergy whom I believe our church doesn't treat well enough and who are still eager to serve. I see your 50-some deacons. I see all your current clergy. I see your historically African-American parishes, which have so much to offer to all the rest of us. I see your chain of Episcopal schools. My wife served as a school chaplain. All of our children have gone to Episcopal schools at various times, so I am a passionate believer in the power and evangelical witness of our Episcopal schools. I see a web of connection where we strengthen the weakest, where we delight in the strong, where the strong help the weak, where we are called to build up each other together and walk in love as Christ loves us. I've said that a few times before, and it just came to me. I'm looking for the timekeeper. Okay, I believe
You're good.
have to stop it right there. I'm a preacher. I could get excited.
Well, in that case, Randy, why don't we ask you to briefly describe a congregational development success story that you saw or helped with?
So I've been blessed to be involved in building the kingdom, congregational development, for almost 30 years. In the Diocese of New York, I served on what was called the Congregational Support Plan Committee, which sent me out into all sorts of parishes that were aided parishes from the diocese, asking whether they would continue in the plan, visiting new parishes in the plan, monitoring their progress in the plan. Were they teaching stewardship? Were they managing an endowment if they had it? How was the state of their buildings? That taught me a lot. But then one day, our suffragan bishop came to me and said, I have something much more personal for you. I was serving this historic parish. It was founded by the Bolton family, this incredible family. It had priests galore, and they founded parishes all over the place. There was this neighboring small parish that our suffragan bishop said is about to be closed. We want to give it one more chance. We're sending in a vicar part-time. I want you and your parish to engage in strategic partnership together and pray and learn together and support one another. That vicar went in there initially quarter time. The vestry had not met in a year and a half, 2 years. There were 6 people. There was no music. A member was recording music and pushing play on the CD player. The buildings were falling apart. There was no signage, no web page. You see where this is going. Our parish started to pray. We started to make strategic connections. From the diocese, we got grants from the Property Support Committee. We applied to a neighboring parish we knew had funds that would apply to just that sort of renovation. We worked with that new vicar. We supported that vicar. We got our people there and their people with us. I preached there. I met with that vestry. we saw them and worked with them as they renovated almost anything that could be renovated. But the most important thing that vicar did was preach and teach the faith. Preach and teach about what it meant to give. What is stewardship? Start Bible study. Pray with the vestry. Teach the vestry. Get involved with the community. The rectory was falling down. They renovated the rectory, which meant a retired priest could live in the rectory and help serve in the parish. It was an infectious sort of growth. They brought in an AA group, so there was involvement in the community. That taught me more than I can even describe. And I still thank God for that story and the fact that that little parish is still existing all these years later.
So the average length of existence for an American prayer book is about 50 years, which means ours is ready for review and for revision. I predicted long ago that we would be celebrating from the Disc of Common Prayer. Well, that's gone. What do you foresee the future of the prayer book to be, and what would you like to see in a new one?
I think there's a creative tension when we look at the prayer book. On the one hand, the prayer book grounds us in sacred tradition, that there is an importance in praying the words our forebears have prayed for so many years, and our brothers and sisters around the world are still praying, different variations, but a discernible pattern on the one side. But on the other side, we follow a God who always says, I'm about to do a new thing. Even now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I see that as the tension. And as a deputy to General Convention, that was a tension we wrestled with. One of my mentors from seminary was charged to lead the committee studying prayer book revision, Bishop Neil Alexander. I have learned from discussions with him and from that group, some of the principles that seem to be emerging is engaging new technology so that we may not replace the entire prayer book, but we may be providing ever more resources as options, at least in a shorter term approach. That seems to be the movement in which we're heading, and that would seem in a way to be an answer to that creative tension. I mean, we've been doing this for several years, as you know, enriching our worship, for instance, providing opportunities for newer, more inclusive expressions of worship, while also, for instance, certainly maintaining and retaining Rite 1 and Rite 2. I think and feel that's the direction we're heading, rather than a wholesale revision. A wholesale revision would be incredibly expensive, incredibly, in a way, environmentally unsustainable. Eventually there will be a wholesale revision, but it's also a little bit like our brothers and sisters in the Church of England, where you know, right, the 1662 Book of Common Prayer is still the official prayer book of England, and it would require an act of Parliament to change it, but they have had many revisions of actual lived worship, including now celebrating common prayer, I believe it's called. Or common worship is what it's called. Common worship has a host of Eucharistic prayers and options, many of which are beautifully written, many of which I've used and been proud to use. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, would you describe some significant issue that you have changed your mind about in the last 10 years?
I used to wonder how the church could ever fully bless gay and lesbian relationships. And my challenge with that was not against gay and lesbian friends who in many ways helped make me who I am. My question was how we would do that and be true to our tradition, and how we'd be true to the church around the world and to our witness. I have to say I've grown and changed. And I even have to say I have to repent of some of my earlier struggle. We have been asked to preside and preach and help celebrate several of those relationships. including my college roommate and his partner who'd been together for 22 years. And when marriage became legal, they first did a secular marriage, but they're believers. And they said, we want to ask God's blessing upon our union, and we trust you to do it, and we want you to do it. And I felt like I was standing on holy ground. And as I preached it, that blessing, the point I felt I had to make was we weren't blessing a gay marriage, we were blessing a marriage. Because marriage is about mutually sacrificial love and commitment and building up the other. And Scripture tells us you'll know them by their fruits, right? There was a lot of fruit and evidence. I've been blessed to preach at a couple of other occasions, and Patty and I together had the blessing of presiding over the wedding of two of our dearest friends. And one of those friends reminds us always, don't assume because someone is gay, they're not a deep, even conservative believer. He's taught us so much. He's one of the deepest, most conservative creedal believers I've ever seen, who happens also to be gay. So we'd be impoverished if it weren't for them. I'm about to do a new thing. Do you not perceive it?
Thank you, Randy. I'll take that, Randy. And now we will hear from the Reverend Carrie Schofield Broadbent, who comes to us from New York. And she will tell you where in New York that is.
Have people been up there?
Yeah, you can
Be wherever you want.
Do I need a little more height, maybe?
A little
All
more
right.
height.
Hi, I'm Carrie Schofield Broadbent. I'm from the Diocese of Central New York, which is kind of the Syracuse area. And it is my joy and my honor to be here with you today and this week. I am here with my husband, Keith. There he is. Keith works for a marketing and PR firm, and he loves to cook. Together, we have 2 kids. Our son, Will, is 20, and our daughter, Kate, is 17. I became a mom and a priest all kind of at the same time. And so I learned time management really quickly. And I also have woven those 2 vocations together as one vocation. And I've developed a leadership style that has kind of a soft front and strong back. I spent the years before seminary doing conflict resolution work, majored in peace and conflict studies, trained mediators, did conflict resolution work, and I have not had to put those skills away during my ordained ministry. As a canon to the ordinary, I work with conflict all the time, and I also serve as a consultant around the country for conflicted parishes, dioceses, and vestries. Excuse me. My ordained ministry began in 3 small churches, mostly rural. One of them still does not have running water. And then I served on the cathedral staff in an urban congregation, and I served as a rector of St. Matthew's in Liverpool for 10 years, where during that time together, we redeveloped that parish and revitalized that into a healthy, vibrant parish. And the way I knew we did a good job is that after they left, they called someone who's very unlike me and very wonderful, and they're doing great. The proof in the pudding is in the tasting, right? It's when we can look back and see. That's how I know that worked pretty well. But for the past 7 years, or I'm in my 7th year now, I've been serving as a canon in the Diocese of Central New York. My official title is Canon to the Ordinary for Transition and Church Development. I got asked to be on the bishop's staff the week after her consecration, And it's been my honor and privilege to watch her become a bishop. She's great, and I think I've been in a master class for leadership for the past 6 years. I am invited to the table where the big decisions are made, and I see what the ministry of a bishop is, both the bright, shiny parts and the underbelly, and I still feel called to discern this call with you. I've seen how that ministry can be lived out really well and really faithfully. Everything I've seen and heard and experienced about the Diocese of Maryland leads me to understand that you are a diocese of great strength and determination. I am inspired by your commitment to truth-telling. I've seen people even correct each other to, not correct each other, but even encourage one another to tell an even deeper truth in conversations. I'm absolutely inspired by your tenacious commitment to racial justice and reparations. I have a lot to learn from you all about that. I love your dedication to your ministries, and also I love how much you love your parishes. It's been an honor to be here and discern what ministry might look like if God calls us together. So thank you for welcoming me here.
Thank you, Carrie. Now, you have touched on this, but you may want to approach it from another direction. Briefly describe a congregational development success story that you saw or helped with.
Thank you. Perhaps the congregational development story that is closest to my heart right now is, in my current position, I've created a cadre of congregational development practitioners. And together we meet and we hone our skills together, and we learn how to empower congregations together, so that in our system, I'm not the only one who can do congregational development. Actually, on a bishop's staff, that's kind of the job of everybody on a bishop's staff, is developing our congregations. So we have a cadre of congregational development practitioners that can go out into our congregations and lead vestry retreats. They can lead mutual ministry reviews, and also consult when things get a little tough, and present some congregational development models, looking at how to reach out to our neighborhood better, how to deepen the practices that we already find strengthening. And so that's one of the things that comes to mind when I hear that question is the developers that we have in our diocese. And then the other thing that comes to mind is my time at St. Matthew's in Liverpool as congregational development. We had this tagline that we used, especially in the beginning, was St. Matthew's, feel good about church again. We put everything through that lens. How are we going to do this? What decision are we going to make? What's going to help people feel good about being in this church? And then as we went on, we deepened our relationships, we defined our identity and our core values and spoke about those, and made sure that our decisions, our allocations of resources, and how we were moving forward aligned with all of those.
So in the American church, the average lifespan of a prayer book is about 50 years, which means we're about due. What do you envision the future of the prayer book to be, and what would you like to see included?
Thank you. As a priest, I should probably say my favorite book is the Bible, but that prayer book, man, that's a good one. I believe where the conversations are right now in the House of Bishops and among the people who make a lot of decisions about this is to be able to create new resources while keeping the old. And we're currently doing that, right? We have Enriching Our Worship, we have Liturgies for All Seasons, we've kept our prayer book and then expanded it more. And I think that's where the church is heading. Our common prayer binds us together. And I know that it is there's a real sense of security, groundedness, and richness when we can go into any Episcopal church anywhere and find the prayer book, usually red, sometimes black, sometimes What color is it in your pew? Excellent. There's not a best color for the prayer book, but if there is one. And so I think that's what we're going to do as Episcopalians is this both and via media. We now have digital resources, so we can make sure that our prayer book doesn't have to be contained just within those bound pages. We can expand that. And so I hope our new prayer book and our new expressions of liturgy will take into account the richness of our Anglican tradition, as we do, and I trust that we will. We're not at risk of losing that. I trust that we'll look ahead and listen to voices of traditionally marginalized people to see how some of our language resounds and sounds in their ears, not just in our ears. And I hope that as we move forward, we're holding on to tradition and not nostalgia, and that we're able to come up with something that feels right. And I trust our church to do that. I've seen us during the time of COVID hang on to our tradition really well while innovating. So I trust that our church will be able to do that.
Thank you. And now, if you would describe some significant issue that you have changed your mind about in the last 10 years.
A significant issue that I've changed my mind about in the last 10 years. Thank you. I love that question because it shows how important it is to be able to change our minds. And I find that as I get older, I can change my mind, but I realize I have to decide to change my mind. It doesn't come as naturally as it did when I was a child. But when you say that, two stories come to mind. The first one is around Dia de los Muertos. It's a Mexican celebration, Day of the Dead. In my family, we had a really significant loss in our family right around that time. And I always loved Day of the Dead. I loved the idea that it felt like resurrection to me. It felt like life in the midst of death. So I had all the sugar skulls. I had all of the stuff. It felt meaningful to me to be able to remember our ancestors in that way. And then one day, my neighbor, who is Mexican, posted on Facebook a picture from Marshall's of this kind of sugar skull statue in all Mexican traditional garb. And she said, "Hey, Marshall's, culturally appropriate much?" And I could have been really defensive. One, because of my deep love for Marshall's. And two, because of my deep affection for Day of the Dead, which I feel like I wasn't just using as cheap decoration. I feel like I really had a good reason to hold that closely. But that post caught me short, and I thought, you know what? I'm culturally appropriating. And just because I want to, and because I feel good, and because I like it, doesn't mean it's right. And so I have since given all of those away to my neighbor, all of my stuff. And I've shared with her that the impact that she had in my life by sharing that her witness and her putting that out there changed this person's heart. Do I have time for another one? Quick. The other one is a system that changed its mind. We have a congregation in the Diocese of Central New York that had a history of criminal sexual abuse. And for a long time, we were trying to do a top-down approach. You need to do this, you need to heal, you need to do this, here's a process. Turns out we didn't really know exactly what we were doing. In the congregation, we kept hearing, and by we, I mean kind of the whole diocese in many different iterations. It's not one person's fault. As I began to listen to them, as we began to listen to them, I heard them saying, "We're not broken. We're okay. We're not broken. We're okay." And so as I worked with that congregation, I was like, I need to believe them because those top-down things didn't work. We need to believe them. When they say they're okay, we need to believe them. And once I did, they were able to tell some of their hurts as well. And so that was a moment of humility as a diocesan person where the system needed to change our minds.
Thank you. Oh, no. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Is that it?
Well, for the moment.
You got more? Oh, okay. Thanks, guys.
We were just double checking to make sure there was not a fifth candidate, so. We're now going to take about a 10-minute break. So please get up, stretch your legs. This will be your last chance to get a card to Jason, wherever Jason is, and he will deliver them up unto us. You can turn that off now.
Well, we got through that part.
Friends, it's time to regather. Let me invite our candidates to take places at the altar. Choose a seat. You get to choose first.
All right.
Greg and Randy and Alyssa. I know. Please take your seats. Friends, please take your seats. We have a limited time. We will. Okay, that's right. All right, we're ready to reconvene. We have a limited time. Some of us turn into pumpkins at 3 o'clock. The candidates are ready. 4, not 5. The candidates are ready to answer some questions that you have submitted. The Church of the Redeemer has very kindly installed trap doors under each of the chairs, so answers which exceed 2 minutes will be dramatic. But I will begin to ask the first question. These are the ones that you have submitted. There are way more than we can ask, so we've kind of picked ones that we thought were really appropriate. There is a lot of information on the website, and I know sometimes it's difficult to get to web pages to find things, but I encourage you to do that, to ask for help. We want all kinds of questions answered. We don't think any questions are inappropriate, but we also want to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. So with that, we will get out of the way.
You doing it first?
And we will kind of alternate the order here. Go ahead, first question, and we will start with Randy and move this way, and then we'll switch things up.
All right, our first question is, of what importance to you is music as a part of the worship experience? We'll start with Randy and go right down the line.
Thank you. Just had a conversation in the lobby with someone who knew of my piano teacher growing up. So I think I'm going to channel her for a minute. I was blessed growing up to have a Lutheran organist as my piano teacher. I grew up in an evangelical tradition, so she started planting seeds from an early day about the power of liturgy and music to praise God and to bring people together. So I think music is central to our worship and to our call. I've come to believe over the years there's no one certain right way to engage music in our worship because God engages us in more than one way. So I believe in a choir, I believe in folk masses, I believe in taizé chant, I believe in chants that we sing and respond together. But the key thing is not how we do it, but why we do it. It's not performance in the church. It's worship. And I think you can feel when worship is happening through our music. There's an element of music that can crack our heart open. And I think this is something I bring from my background. As much as I love our tradition, and I really do, sometimes we can be awfully in our heads. And I think we have to get in our head and our heart. Sometimes it's said the longest distance is from the head to the heart. But I believe God meets us in both, and sometimes music is the conduit to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Our music. One of the favorite parts of my job is that I get to go to different churches to visit every Sunday, and the breadth and diversity of the Episcopal Church is amazing. We have some tiny, tiny parishes that don't have a musician that use like a recorder and they have the music playing. I was taught in seminary that that's not okay, but these small churches are proving otherwise. And I go to churches with robust music traditions and some churches that have quiet services or services without song. I love them all. I think it's important that the worshiping community expresses how they connect to God in the best way. One thing I appreciate about music in church is when it is chosen and presented pastorally. I was at a conference recently and they were teaching us new songs, and they taught it well. They had us sing with them, and we had the music and words in front of us, and we could participate. And that was well done and well chosen. And because they had done that, I felt cared for. Like, these people aren't going to know this song. We're going to help them out. And so I think music is a wonderful part of our tradition and our liturgy. I love to sing the Eucharist, but I don't have to. When I go into a parish, I usually ask, do you guys know the sung responses? Because it's no good if I start singing the Sursum Corda and then the congregation feels bad that they don't know how to respond. So I think it's important that each congregation lives out its true beliefs.
The first time I sang in church, I was 2.5 years old, and I treated the congregation to a version of Zacchaeus Was a Wee Little Man. It was well received. It was not an Episcopal church. I was raised in an evangelical tradition, and my mother was the choir director and minister of music in my church growing up. So I have been steeped in music of many, many kinds. I came to love very much the music at the church that ordained me, which has a suspended pipe organ, one of the only suspended pipe organs on the West Coast, and paid section leaders. They still, in good times and in bad times, when they've been able to afford a full-time priest and when they haven't been able to afford it, they've always been able to afford paid section leaders for their choir. And now my congregation that I serve, we have a piano. We have some folks who know how to play guitar. Recently, one of our newest members came in and sort of shyly admitted that he played saxophone at the church that he was at before, which was an evangelical church, but he was told he wasn't good enough to keep playing it there. And at St. Columba's, if you have an instrument, if you possess one, you are good enough to play. So at St. Columba's on a Sunday morning, we'll see everyone who wants to play something will come and play, including a little guy that I baptized 8 years ago who has guitar lessons at 10 a.m. and then brings his guitar to church and sits with Al and David between their two big guitars and plays along. All of these are faithful, beautiful examples of what music is, which it's the prayers of our hearts. It is praying twice. Somebody famous said that, maybe Augustine. Don't look it up. And so for me, of course we sing. I can't imagine life without music for many reasons. I can't imagine prayer without music, although I'm happy to speak a service as well.
Well, a couple of the things you may or may not have picked up about me by reading the copious material online is that one of the things I studied in college was music. I started as a music major and got a certificate in church music. And I'm also a bit of an avid vinyl record collector. And right now I'm building out my collection of 60s and 70s funk and soul music and gospel music because I like a variety of traditions. I like a variety of expressions, a variety of genres of music. And in the church, we have inherited a particular stream that we have worked very well for a very long time. And I also think that we need, as Randy was speaking about, to engage other types of music, probably a little more broadly and fully than many of us do. I'm really excited looking at your hymns for tomorrow that leave us as part of the roster. At my church, I try to build in a variety of tonalities, a variety of music from the literature that we have. We've been using quite a bit recently from Voices Found, which is a hymnal that incorporates songs written by women. And so we've really gotten to where we're exploring a whole lot of different avenues in music. Sometimes it's the organ, and we have a beautiful pipe organ, and sometimes that doesn't fit. Piano is what you need. So I don't have one sort of, this is how I view music in the church, because to me the function of music is to lift all of our hearts and souls and our praises to God. And that many of us access that through music that maybe we haven't always sung in our Episcopal churches. I'm a rock and roll and blues musician, and so how I intersect music often is different than many people of an intellectual tradition. And I want to be moved, and I think our people want to be moved by our music. That's the most important thing.
So this question will elicit very different answers from all of you. In your congregational leadership, what was the greatest financial risk that you encouraged and took, and what learning did you take away from it? And let's start with Greg and go back this way.
Okay. I come from a parish, Midwestern parish with very Midwestern values, very sort of fiscally conservative values, and that has preserved the church and kept the church going for a long time. And yet we've encountered a lot of turbulence over the last few years. We have maintained a very solid financial base. But one of the risks I encourage the congregation to take based on what seems to happen year over year is to pass a very slightly imbalanced budget, which was met by horror with the first finance committee in the vestry. We have to have a balanced budget. Well, what we were doing is making up numbers to get to a balanced budget as opposed to really honestly examining the reality. And so I adopted a philosophy that said, I believe a slight deficit budget, imbalanced budget, and I'm not talking about 25, 40, 50%, I'm talking about a slight one, keeps the congregation leaning forward. It keeps them looking to the future and wondering, like, hey, I've got to do my part here to make sure that we end the year, square, and that's paid dividends. No pun intended. But that has worked because we don't all sit back on our heels and say, oh, the budget's fine, the money's fine, we don't have to really worry, my pledge isn't that important. All of those messages we can talk ourselves into, I think. And so one of the risks I took was changing the attitude about the budget, about money, in a congregation, in this context. I'm not saying this is a universal principle that should be applied everywhere, but in my context, it got people off their heels and onto their toes to say, my part does matter. What I contribute does matter. How we do this matters. How we watch our money matters. Where we look for other opportunities for giving, not just the annual stewardship campaign, but other opportunities matters. And you know what? Almost every year, we've come over into the black. So that's a risk I took, and one that, at least in my congregation, has paid off.
I think the biggest financial risk I have taken as a congregational leader has been to encourage my leadership in my congregation to ask for what we need. Now, initially, the first year I was at St. Columba's, and I came in, we had a $1.2 million mortgage. We had about 45 people total, and many of them were older. They still are older, even older now, but they're no longer the majority of the people. And they had really a mindset of scarcity. We put together our budget, and we realized that what we needed to do what we felt called to do together was we needed $130,000 in pledges, and they could not imagine it. They did not think it was possible. They said, it will be so discouraging if we put out this number and then we don't get it. And so I said, well, tell me what we don't need. And we needed it. And so we asked for it, and we got it. And we have entered into this process of asking for what we need, even if it costs money. Because we've asked for what we need, we now have a $350,000 mortgage, down from $1.2 million. Because we have asked for what we need, we have been able to work with the diocese to replace every major part of our building that needed updating. We've gotten a new HVAC, we've gotten new windows. The only thing that is still out there is the roof, and our building is of an age where systems are needing replacement. Because we have asked for what we need, we've been able to turn an acre of our land into an immigrant and refugee community garden for people who are recently arrived to the United States. Because we ask for what we need, we were able to do a small capital campaign and build a memorial garden so that our beloved dead can rest with us instead of somewhere else. It is risky to ask for what you need, but it is the only way to get it.
When I started at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Liverpool as their rector, one of the big burdens and stressors that we had was this balloon payment on a loan. They had taken a big, huge loan to fix their parking lot and roof. And they didn't really figure into the last capital campaign all of the financial fees and all of that. So that was a big stress. We found ourselves several years down the road welcoming another congregation into ours. The church down the road closed, and we welcomed their members in, and we had the wonderful problem of not having enough space. And so we needed to do a building project. And so one big risk was starting a capital campaign. I had never done that before. St. Matthew's didn't understand themselves to be a wealthy congregation, but we listened to the experts, we set our goal, and we did a very good building project. And so that was a financial risk. I think that one financial shift that we made that was helpful, I'm kind of reframing the question a little bit, is that we started in our budget process to ask each committee and each person responsible for a budget to submit 3 columns in their budget request. Bare bones budget, this is literally what we call them, wishful thinking, and pie in the sky. So bare bones is, if we run out of money and big headaches and heartaches happen, what's the minimum you need to do your work? Wishful thinking is, if we had a little bit more, what would you like to do? And then pie in the sky is, if we had all the money in the world, what would you do with your ministry? And what that did was not give us all the money in the world, but it allowed us to free our creativity and to dream dreams that weren't constrained by financial realities. And sometimes we dreamed dreams that actually were affordable. I'm sorry, I was going to say more, but I just cut Mark's little...
You may remember I mentioned earlier having served in New York during the Great Recession of the period between 07, 08, 09. And our parish, Christ Church Pelham, was hit at least a double whammy, maybe a triple. I remember distinctly the day that Bear Stearns collapsed. Parishioners who worked there, their livelihood collapsed. Our pledges were slashed. We were blessed to have an endowment and draw some income from the endowment. That was slashed. All of a sudden, our budget lost a couple $100,000. And I remember sitting around the vestry table right after that. And you could feel the tension. And they were in a mood to cut. They were in a mood to slash. And I had to channel Edwin Friedman, who said, try to be a non-anxious, self-differentiated presence. And thankfully, I channeled the Bishop of New York, who had met with us and said, in times of crisis, don't slash with a machete, use a scalpel. Talk about what is essential to who you are and to your ministry. So we were able to cut some things strategically, but keep some things that we viewed as essential to who we are, like the music program, like our outreach, like our welcome, like our hospitality to the community. We found a couple of interesting things. Some of our laity found themselves investing more in human capital. Some things we'd been paying to be done were done by our people. In some cases, better. It deepened our fellowship. Likewise, there was a move in that anxious moment to take more draw from our endowment. And I and others had to say, no, we have to think not only of our mission and essential identity now, but we have to think of the future and what God's calling us to do and be. And we are going to exercise discipline together. And I can only say God showed up, and we experienced abundance. And then soon after that, we received a few bequests, and we were able to do some of the things we had to defer earlier. Thank God for planned giving.
Next question, coming from a youth group. How would you approach counseling someone considering an abortion? And the order of answering will be Randy, Greg, Alicia, and Carrie. The question is from a youth group, how would you or how do you approach counseling someone considering an abortion? And this question came from a youth group.
So is this a member of the youth group?
That is not specified on the card, but it says it's from the youth group.
Okay, so it does. I think that's an important distinction if it's coming from a member of the youth group. First of all, regardless of whom is coming, the chief goal is to meet them as a child of God, to respect their inherent dignity, and to pray together. If it is a member of the youth group, to remind them that they're loved, to meet them in their obvious anxiety and no doubt fear as they're trying to decide what the right thing to do is. I would have to encourage them. I would at least ask them if their parents know. I would feel honor-bound to at least ask that question and ask if it was safe to engage the parents, if it's possible that the parents could provide some wisdom and guidance here. I would have to talk about the gift of life, which we believe is sacred, but I would also have to talk about the precious life of the young person right before me as sacred, and how they envision the life that God's calling them to, and how that might be irretrievably altered if they pursued the pregnancy. So it would be fraught. Here's what I honestly want to say. I don't think there's any magic bullet answer. I can't stand here and say exactly what I would do. I've not had that exact situation. It takes a lot to shock me, but I've never had that exact situation. But I could tell you I would meet them as a child of God, and I would invite them to open their heart, and we would pray together, and I would honor their decision. And I would remind them that whatever their decision, they were irrevocably a member of this parish and beloved of God.
Leave it to our young people to hold our feet to the fire, and a little child shall lead them. It's these situations, I think, where for clergy and parents and leaders in a church, that we all say, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on all of us, and we proceed with fear and trepidation. So I echo many of Randy's sentiments in that regard. I would see counseling that young person, first of all, as not an individual thing between priest and young person. If this is a member of a youth group and there is a leader of that group, I'd want that person to be part of the conversation because that's who they had come to or where it had come through. I believe in as much as possible, the parents have to be involved in this decision. They have to be, and if they haven't told the parents, I will be with you when you do, not if you do. But we're going to talk to your family. How might I best be with you in that? My first and foremost pastoral response will be to this young person, to let them know that God is present with them and in them in the midst of this circumstance that they find themselves. I don't believe that I have the right to counsel somebody to have an abortion or not to have an abortion, but to be with them in the middle of that mess and all of the angst and help to lead them by whatever I can do through whatever channels I can manage, both inside the church and outside the church, to get help and resources and counsel and advice, to guide them to a decision that they believe is best for them. I know that's an ambiguous answer, but I also resent the fact that in our culture it has become such a divided either or, black or white, you either feel this way or that way issue, when we as Anglicans know there's much more complexity to the mess of life, and I would commit to being in that mess with that young person and their family.
I have had the immense honor and privilege of walking with women of many different ages through difficult reproductive health decision-making. And this is what I tell each person when they sit down with me. I say, no one can do this for you, but you do not have to do it alone. And then we go from there. And of course, it depends on who that person is. But the most important thing for me as a pastor in any tender and fraught situation that involves bodies and health and momentous future decisions is that the person I sit with and pray with knows that they are not alone, that God is with them and that their priest is with them. That is what priests are for. Whether it is confession, whether it is a hospital bed, whether it is breaking down in my office because you're pregnant when you don't want to be or because you're not when you do, I am here to let you know that while I cannot do it for you, you do not have to do this alone. Ideally, we build a community of support around each vulnerable human who faces choices like this. And ideally, that community of support respects the individual's need and right to make choices about their body and is committed to loving that human being through that decision making and through whatever consequences come from it. Because with a decision like that, either way, there are consequences. Choices make consequences. But the biggest message is, while I cannot do it for you, you do not have to do this alone.
So how would I counsel a person coming to me who is deciding about an abortion? I'm assuming in that question that I have a pastoral relationship with the person and that it's appropriate for me to be talking to the person about this. I think a bishop needs to be ready for any question. Especially you're preparing people for confirmation, and bishops need to be ready for any conversation. And this would be a big deal. We're talking about discernment, and the church knows how to do discernment. We don't tell people what to do. We say, what's God calling you? What does your prayer life say? What are the pros and cons? What questions are you asking? We know how to discern with people. It's also important that our priests feel equipped to be able to pastor folks in tough situations, and that bishops can show up pastorally. One thing that I bring to a pastoral conversation is to not throw out cliches, especially not unhelpful ones, like everything happens for a reason, or you'll look back on this and learn something someday. I think that our youth especially deserve better than that. Youth who are going through a struggle deserve our full attention. Even when we're scared about those conversations, they deserve our best so that they can help their faith inform the decisions that they have ahead of them.
We are on a very tight schedule for some of our candidates. So this will probably be the last question, and then we will give them a chance in 2 minutes to kind of do a closing statement. So here's the last question, and if you could keep it to about 1.5 minutes, it's not hard. The question, that is. The preaching I get. The order is Greg, then Carrie, then Randy, then Alyssa. Part of the bishop's job is to visit congregations. What's that going to be like for you? What would you like to do when you visit a congregation?
Wait, that's a part of a bishop's job? That would be my absolute favorite part of this job, because part of what I look forward to in this opportunity to be your bishop would be to get to know each and every one of your congregations in this beautiful, wonderful, diverse diocese that we call Maryland. I want to show up and hear your stories of where you've been, where you are, and where you believe God is leading you. And if you don't have any idea where God is leading you, I want to be part of that conversation so that we can figure that out. I want to know what makes your heart beat. I want to experience your liturgy and your music. All of those things would be the things that bring me great deal of joy in visiting each one of you. I'd want to ask your clergy, what does it look like for you for me to pastor you? How can I be the best pastor to you? I'd like to ask the congregation as a whole, what do you need from your bishop? So visitation to me is the bread and butter. It's the thing I would enjoy the most, is getting out and about and getting to know y'all.
As I've said before, one of my favorite parts of my job right now is congregational visits. I thought that I wasn't sure I would love that because I really loved the richness of being in the same parish Sunday after Sunday, year after year. But visitations are fun. I'm someone who likes new things. I'm someone who likes surprises and changes. And so I love getting up super early in the morning and driving to a different place every Sunday and seeing how they worship. I love that my liturgical customs have become very loose because I have to be very nimble every Sunday. One congregation insisted on putting a cope on me, even though it dragged on the ground. I arrive in the morning early at a congregation, and I go to all the services, and I stay as late as I need to because I love being with the congregation. I love hearing about your stories. I love hearing about how God shows up in your life. And I love the connections that can happen too. One of the great roles of a bishop, and even I can do this as a canon, is to say, oh, you know that ministry you're telling me about, that church over there, they're also doing that. Let me put you in touch. That thing that you're doing right there, do you know how awesome that is? Sometimes that's one of the greatest things about a congregational visit is to lift up the things they think are just normal and they're actually extraordinary.
One of the things I've been reminded of this week is how I am a people person and I'm all about relationships. And my energy has grown throughout the week as I've met more and more of you. So visiting across the diocese would be a supreme joy. I would add to the question, if I might, not only parishes, I would want to visit every school. I'd want to visit the chaplaincies. I'd want to visit the neighborhoods. I'd want to meet with the rectors during the week before a visitation and pray together. Maybe meet with the vestry at the same time. I would want the whole diocese, and maybe you already do, to have a cycle of prayer where we're praying intentionally for the parishes visited that week. There's power in prayer. There's power in praying and lifting up one another together. I, like my colleagues said, would plan to try to be there for the whole bitter end as much as possible. I would like to have laid some of the groundwork in the week before so that it all doesn't happen on the Sunday. But I'd want to be present at coffee hour. I love coffee hour most times. I love coffee hour. I love leading a forum. I'd want to talk about what's going on in the rest of the diocese and how does it apply to you. To combat that question we all get, what does the diocese do for us? None of y'all have heard that. But the bishop needs to be able to answer that and engage that question, but always asking, where's God in this place? And what do we as a whole body need to learn from this place so that we're stronger as a whole body?
I'm a developer. I want to be developing congregations when I visit. So my plan for visitations is to not only visit on a Sunday. My hope is that at least the first time I visit your congregation, and perhaps forever, I will be there for more than one day. And we will do development work together. So we'll assess before I come, what is the edge of your place right now? Are you working on identity? Are you working on expressing yourself to your context? Are you working on connecting with your neighborhood? Are you working on doing that deep internal, which sources of God's transformation are really working for us? And where do we need to do some refreshing, do some data gathering? I want to come and work with you and work for you and be there before the Sunday, working with leaders. It might be the vestry, it might be the whole congregation, it might be a particular strategy group, but I would like to come and give you a concrete tool and consult with you. Because that's how I get to know churches, it's the Sunday morning and the coffee hour, but it's also, what are you working on? How are you discerning right now? How can I, as your bishop, give you some tools and a map for what is to come so that next time I come, we can talk about how things have gone and what is happening. And also so that I can return to my staff in the bishop's office knowing how we can resource you specifically. Knowing that this is what's been expressed in this visit, in this consultation, and here's what my office can do to help you follow up on that and to help you be resourced.
One of the questions I haven't been asked this week yet is, what is my favorite verse of Scripture? Now, my wife says I'm not normally given to superlatives. It's hard for me to pick one, but one is coming to mind right now, and it's when I believe our Lord describes his mission, which I think should have some command on our attention. John 10:10, he said, I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly. In my prayer and sense of call, if by God's grace I were called to be your bishop, I would want to see what the next season of abundance might look like in the Diocese of Maryland. And I know from experience around the church that the lived experience of relationship between so many dioceses and parishes and other institutions is not one of abundance. It's one like the verse we quote in Compline, where we say the enemy is a roaring lion seeking to devour. The diocese is leaning over the shoulder, asking what it can get from us. I think we've got to move past that image. I would dream of a relationship with the diocese walking alongside, a partner in ministry, equipping in ministry, raising up the saints for the work of ministry, resourcing, asking what individual places need, and how the whole can be built up together. I believe we could do so much more together through economy of scale. There's purchasing power in the many that could benefit the few. One very particular instance, our parish just put solar panels on our roofs. I have said to our new bishop that I wish the diocese could give every parish 2 or 3 vetted solar companies that they could trust if they wanted to explore solar, and through which they could reap enormous economic savings by going in that direction. The power of the many. It could contribute to financial planning for clergy, IT management for our computer systems, particularly in small parishes. That's the vision, I believe, walking together. Not the diocese leaning over, but how do we work and build up for God's kingdom together?
Thank you. I've been asked by really wonderful, well-meaning people a version of this question many times, which is, how has this process been? I know it can be so grueling. How has this been for you? I know it can be so invasive and hard. And I say the process has been very good, and I have not felt that it's been invasive or like a gauntlet. In fact, all throughout this process, I and I think we have been received with dignity and respect and compassion and love, generosity and hospitality. From the search committee to the transition committee to our wonderful shepherds, to the people who are hosting us in your contexts for ministry, we've received wonderful questions. And there's a graciousness in this gathered group of 4 here. These guys are all class acts. I'm enjoying getting to know your diocese, and I know that there is a lot more to know, and I would love to do that. And now is the time where we trust God, and we keep praying. We have all brought everything to the table. This process has been a whole lot of speaking from these parts and not a whole lot of listening, but I think that's kind of what we need to do right now. But right now, we trust God and trust the Holy Spirit. We pray and we trust God to lead us to discernment so that the Diocese of Maryland can receive the bishop that you both want and need.
I've had so much fun this week with you. I have felt so much. I've lost my words. That's how much I like you. Which is pretty intense if you know me. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for being the kind of diocese that can provide a kind welcome to 4 very different people and allow us to dream with you. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to have a clergy cohort that genuinely care for each other and love each other. Thank you for showing me Western Maryland, which is so beautiful and in many ways different, and for showing me the South County, and for showing me this. I will forever be a better person for having been in this process and having this chance to know and care for you. And what I want to leave you with, I've said this every night, but today it is the final time. I trust you. You have everything you need, and God is with you as you make this choice, whatever the choice is. If I am your bishop, our relationship begins with trust, and so I start it now. I trust you. You've got this, and I am deeply, deeply grateful for your witness to our church and to our world.
Thank you so much for the honor and privilege of allowing me to be here with you today, allowing all four of us to be here with you today. And I echo many of the sentiments in that we have felt deeply loved and held in this process. And so you've got amazing folks who have been part of this, and I thank you all. 22 and a half years ago, I was given my life back. I was redeemed from the edge, and God said, you get another chance, and I don't take that lightly. A few years ago, I was in career counseling because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and my career counselor had me write a personal mission statement, which I still retain. And that is that I believe why I was put on this earth is to be of maximum service to those within my sphere of influence. I've done that as a lay ministry professional for a couple of decades. I've done that and still do that as a parish priest. And I can promise you that that's what I would do here. To me, one of the exciting opportunities of being a bishop is to expand that sphere of influence, to be able to share what I believe are the gifts that God has given me with a wider group of people. And so I think that my purpose for being here on this planet is to simply to serve others. I would be honored and privileged to be your bishop and to pour my life out in service to all of you. I can say that I love Maryland because I've been here for a little bit in my life, and you helped birth this ordained ministry in me, and that is grateful. I'd like to pay forward that debt of gratitude by serving as your bishop if it is what you and the Holy Spirit decide. Again, I as well trust God to do God's work through and in and among all of you as you make this important decision. And God bless you and keep you as you continue on this journey.
Say thank you.
What a blessing to, and I know some of you have a parish priest who does this every Sunday with this thing falling off your ear. And
Loud, loud.
I understand what it's like a little bit when your parish priest is falling off his ear every Sunday. He's fooling with it. I want to say how wonderful it must be to be in a diocese where people are so enthusiastic about the candidates who come forward to offer themselves as possibilities of being the bishop of the diocese. Your enthusiasm was genuine, and I'm sure they could feel it, and certainly anyone looking at this video will be able to feel it. And thank you so much for coming. And please stay in touch with what is going on. There will continue to be things on the website that you can see and can follow the process. And you know that we are having the electing convention on the 25th, and that each of you who is the delegate from your parish will be there to help make this final decision.
I'm looking for Gail Landers. Is she still here? Gail, dismiss us, please. Thanks be to God.